Good evening, everybody. This is Dr. Serge. I hope you guys had a good weekend. So I had a question asked to me last week about one of my Facebook listener. It was about gluten. I wrote a post about gluten, how people are sensitive to it. And she asked about if gluten sensitivity is actually a Roundup issue, because we hear that quite a bit. So I wanted to spend a few minutes on this topic. So first of all, gluten is a type of protein, is a type of lectin found in grains in general. So all grains have some sort of gluten. And the one we hear a lot more is from wheat, gluten from wheat, rye, barley, brown rice will have it, quinoa, oats, and so on and so on. So a lot of people believe that because they don't eat wheat or rye, they don't eat gluten, but that's not quite the case. So gluten is just a protein found in grains. We hear a lot about gluten from wheat because it seems that there's a lot of gluten-free foods out there, right? So it seems to be a fad. There's a lot of companies that get on board. They make all those different products. So you have to be really careful when it comes to gluten-free foods, because a lot of those foods actually, they replace gluten by sugar and other components like potato starch, tapioca, cassava. So oftentimes those foods have more starches, more sugar, and they could be more fattening if weight is a concern for you guys. So it's always better to avoid gluten by avoiding those gluten-free foods if possible. So gluten is just one component of wheat. I've read some estimate that 1 out of 10 people has a gluten intolerance. So that's 10% of the population. So about 1% of the population have celiac disease. So celiac disease is really an autoimmune conditions where the body reacts strongly to gluten. And some people actually could die from it. There's some internal bleeding, some inflammation going on, and the disease is pretty severe. So in those cases, they really have to avoid gluten at all costs. Otherwise, they have major issues. People with gluten intolerance, they may not have major problem with gluten, but long time they can have problems. For example, the most common one is brain fog. People with brain fog, brain issues, concentration could be a gluten intolerance issue. People with hormonal imbalances, low energy, of course, GI issues. It's not because you don't have gut problems that you don't have gluten intolerance. As a matter of fact, so most people with gluten intolerance do not have GI issues, joint pain, so on and so on. So about 10% of people of the population need to avoid gluten. But the main issues for wheat is not just gluten, is that wheat has a lot more protein than before. Dr. Davis called it dwarf wheat. So it's a shorter version of wheat that we grow in our field today. It's not the same wheat that we used to grow decades ago. And the dwarf wheat has a lot more protein than the one that we used to have. A lot more gluten, and there's hundreds of different other proteins in wheat. For example, WGA, wheat germ agglutinin. So it's another major lectin in wheat. So as a matter of fact, when I was doing some research on heart disease, we will use WGA as a way to induce heart disease in mice, in animals, in order to study the development, the progression of heart disease. From my experience, and I read that in some papers as well, about 80% of the population have some type of sensitivity to wheat, not necessarily gluten, but something in wheat. So when they eat wheat, they feel sluggish, they feel tired, and so on and so on. So that's a major population, and that's why the gluten-free fat is the diet is it's big out there, because when you avoid gluten, you avoid wheat by definition. And you avoid rye and so on. So it's really important for me, at least from my clinical experience, to avoid wheat. Wheat is one of the worst grain to eat right now in this state, in this country. It's not the same type of products. For example, corn, the other type of wheat, the ancient grain, It's pretty healthy for you. I have quite a lot of my patients who consume it without any problems because the wheat content is different, the protein amount is lower, the gluten is lower, it's easier to process, and so on. So wheat typically is the first thing that I recommend people to work on. Okay, let's try to find alternative of wheat, gluten-free bread, gluten-free this, gluten-free that. Of course, everybody is different. 50% of people who have wheat sensitivity also have sensitivity to corn. Because like I said, there's gluten in corn as well. It's not the same type, but there's some cross reaction and people may be sensitive. So if you do gluten free, you have a gluten, the wheat, the rye, barley, for example, and you still feel off, next up is corn. And this is typically a big one for a lot of people, like I said, 50% of the time. And sometimes it's more like a paleo type of diet that is necessary to restore your health and help you with your health issues. So grain is really a major problem in this country, the way we process it. The average grain is stored about 4 years in a warehouse somewhere. Okay, so 4 years before they actually use the grains. If you can imagine, so when you have to store the grains that long, you have to use some chemical. You have to spray them to get rid of the rodents, the mice, the raccoons, and the mold, the fungus, and so on. So those grains are highly sprayed with pesticides and so on, which is that my point is that those grains, because they contain so much pesticide, even organic wheat, for example, can be sprayed by chemicals, by pesticide, Roundup, for example. Because, like I said, they are stored somewhere for some time. So organic doesn't necessarily mean they are chemical free. It just means that they didn't use any chemical. They grow them. But when it's harvested, you have an idea what they do with the grains, and most of the time they are sprayed. So yes, Roundup, those pesticides, really major issues. 93% of the population have problem with pesticide. They have pesticides Roundup in their gut, for example. It's really hard to eliminate. And when you have it in your gut, it disrupt the gut function. It disrupts the villi, the microvilli, where the absorption happens, and leading to gluten sensitivities and food sensitivities. I mean, I see all kind of people with really weird sensitivities, like to tomatoes, to cucumbers, to squashes, to grain, of course, to cheese. I've seen people having problem with chicken, meat. So all those sensitivities don't make sense in a way that we are meant to digest those foods. But because of chemicals like pesticides, which disrupt, would impact the microvilli, which is a small section of the gut that really where the absorption occur in our gut. So when they are affected, typically they are gone in celiac disease, for example. And there's a way to help the body to bring them back. I know a lot of people are concerned about that. But definitely grains is to be avoided if you have issues in order to give a break to your body, because grain is really hard to process or really hard to digest. And of course, that helps you to avoid the chemicals they use to store them. And that allows your body to rest, detox the Roundup. There's ways to do that. It's not that easy, right? But clinically, there's some herbs, there's some products we can utilize to detox pesticides and allow your body to reverse the inflammation, the leaky gut, and finally reverse those sensitivities so you can eat foods again. So that was what I wanted to say about gluten intolerant. Yes, it's a major thing on there for a reason. Is a lot of people have issues, not necessarily because of the actual grain, but a lot of it is caused by the chemicals that are in our gut, disrupting the gut function. Thank you guys for watching. God bless you.